Hi, I'm Jim Crooks. I'm a retired UNF professor of history, author of a book on consolidation called Jacksonville, the Consolidation Story, From Civil Rights to the Jaguars.
So you've studied and followed consolidation, most of its 50 years.
Yes.
And what's your overall impression, conclusion? How has it worked?
It's actually worked pretty well with some exceptions. I've been doing some recent research, and it shows that over the 50 years we've done some great environmental developments, whether it's cleaning the air, we remember the smelly city, whether it's in terms of the Timucuan Ecological Preserve, as well as cleaning up the St. Johns River, because I can remember when we couldn't go swimming and people are now swimming in the river. So that's been a major achievement. I think another achievement that started from the very beginning was to professionalize most of the instruments of city government, the police, the fire, the health, the education, and so forth. We often don't think of the schools as being part of consolidation, but of course they are, as Duval County Public Schools are part of, and they've improved substantially over the last 50 years. So one can say that there has been substantial improvement. Now, the shortcomings are basically two or threefold. First, downtown hasn't kept up with other downtowns for a lot of different reasons. Not all of them the fault of Jacksonville. I mean, when you have a national recession, federal money dries up, state money dries up, etc. But downtown hasn't kept up as some other cities of comparable size and importance. Secondly, when Mayor Tanzler, the first consolidation mayor, took office, one of his priorities was to cut the millage rate and taxation. And that became a pattern that every mayor since then has tried to achieve. And Joan Carver, who used to teach political science at Jacksonville University, did a paper in the early 70s and said that the average homeowner with a 1 mil reduction saves $10 a year. And so it's not helping the average homeowner. It's the millage cut rates, the cutting rates are helping the big businesses and the wealthy homeowners. And finally, the third weakness has, of course, been its relationship to the African American community. There were promises made at the beginning to upgrade the infrastructure in the old city, and it was only partially done. And when we clear-cut La Villa, that destroyed a historical neighborhood. And we've been unwilling to spend the money to upgrade the north side as we were willing to spend money to modernize Mandarin when white folks moved out to Mandarin. So there's a real discrepancy between the white and black communities in Jacksonville despite consolidation.
Now you mentioned promises. I want to see if we can make a distinction between explicit promises by politicians, by the way, and expectations. I'm not aware of some of these quote-unquote promises being documented. It may be just that people expected a lot of things from consolidation that couldn't happen because the budget was being cut and so forth, tax millage.
Well, there's a segment in the original document for consolidation that argues or states that the old city will be upgraded, referring to the old residential areas on the north side. So there is a distinct promise, and when the consolidation was looked at 2 or 3 years ago by a city council commission, they reiterated that this was in there and even recommended themselves that a certain proportion of the capital improvement budget each year be set aside to play catch-up on the north side.
Kind of a vague promise, if I may say so.
Well, you can say vague because you can't say, well, I'm going to pave X street and put in sewers on Y street and so forth. But at the same time, you can say that there are many, many dilapidated housing on the north side, and there are people who don't have sewers and don't have water, maybe cannot afford it. And then the question becomes, well, who should pay for it, and what responsibilities does the city have for the health of its least advantaged residents?
So let's speculate on voters in August 1967 said no.
That's interesting because I've thought about that too. Tampa, Hillsborough went through the same process, and they voted no in 1967. And they've come a longer way than we have in terms of progress. They have equally complete environmental development, ecological development in the county area. The Hillsborough County passed legislation in the 80s to provide health care for lower income people not eligible for Medicaid. They have, of course, a major university that's much more substantial than our major state university. And they have 3 professional sports teams and a downtown that's thriving. Now, they've done something right, and I'm not sure what they've done right, whether it was the business community working together. I do know that in the 80s, then Governor Bob Graham had the opportunity to remove 3 county commissioners from the Hillsborough County Commission and brought in replacements, one of whom was a member of the Sierra Club, and they developed a concern for the environmental well-being of Hillsborough County.
So maybe we would say that success for an urban area can be achieved without consolidation, but consolidation makes it more likely?
We can say that in the end, it depends on the leadership, the support of the establishment, and the willingness to pay for quality government. There was a recent quote that I saw from Preston Haskell, who's a prominent businessman, homeowner in Jacksonville, and he said, no city ever became great by cutting its taxes.
Yeah. So to speculate again about what Jacksonville would be like without consolidation, you're not convinced that it would be better?
No, and again, it would depend. Back in the day, in the late 60s, the consequence of not having consolidation would have meant that there would have been a majority black community because it was 42% black in 1967. And the image of black politics in the 1960s was in cities like Newark and Gary, Indiana, and Cleveland, Ohio, was not very good. Of course, if we look more closely in more recent years to Atlanta or Charlotte or Baltimore and some other cities that have had black leadership, you can't put it on race. You know, it would again depend on the quality of the leadership coming out of the Jacksonville African American community, whether the white community would have run further away or stayed as they did in Atlanta when a few of the leaders in Coca-Cola and elsewhere told their counterparts, this is our community, we want to make it a great city. And that could have happened here also with people like J.J. Daniel, who I think was a very wise man.
And I suppose we could call it buyer's remorse, but black voters, if I'm not mistaken, voted yes on consolidation.
Yes, they did.
But I'm hearing some second thoughts here and there.
I think, well, I can't speak for black voters. UNF had a symposium back in the 90s at the 25th anniversary of how consolidation fared in the African American community. And most of the speakers were very critical, and in areas of education, police, community relations, and so forth. Others were critical but were hopeful. I remember particularly our mutual friend Alton Yates saying, well, yes, the police community relations have not been particularly good, but he was hopeful for the future that there would be a greater equity and African Americans have a better chance. And of course, we know individuals have had. We've had a black mayor, a black sheriff, et cetera, and individuals have achieved substantially individual African Americans. But across the board, the poverty rate, the crime rate, the health rate, the black community is sicker, poorer, and more likely to be in prison than the white community.
Why do you suppose it hasn't caught on? A lot of other cities have failed to consolidate?
I think one reason is there are more communities. Take Miami-Dade, for example. There are over 100 different cities, small cities, and there's a certain civic pride. It's like if we had 3 dozen Atlantic beaches, Jacksonville beaches, and Neptune beaches, we never would have consolidated. If Arlington and Mandarin had been separate villages, we never would have consolidated. So I think one of the barriers to consolidation is the reality that local townships are proud of their local townships and don't want to necessarily get involved with that big bad city.
And what was going on in Jacksonville at the time helped build momentum, I suppose. Scandal and public officials going to prison and so forth.
Of course, and what Channel 4 did in not only awakening the community, but getting the grand jury to operate, because you can have exposés and nothing happens. But the grand jury responded with indictments, as you well know, and not all the indicted people went to jail, but a good proportion did, and of course it came across as scandalous. But I would come back to the fact, I think the unsung hero of consolidation may be Lex Hester. Hester was hired by J.J. Daniel, to not only run the consolidation study, but to run the implementation towards the referendum, organize the voters. We had I think it was a 46% turnout in that August referendum that passed consolidation. Now, to have that in a local election is quite amazing in the middle of the summer.
And it passed by 3 margin.
Yeah, I think it was 75% or something like that.
And then we watched as the new government got ready to get going. After August '67, there was an election to elect 20 politicians to run the government, a mayor and 19 city council members. That was probably in the summer of '68, leading up to them taking office on October 1.
No, it was earlier than that. It was the fall of '67, because there needed to be time to organize the new. It was in the spring of '68 that well, Tanzler was reelected anyway, but Lex Hester was hired as chief administrative officer, I believe in the spring of '68, and he was the one that started putting all the pieces together, because he was a wizard at public administration.
How was the transition? You had these lame ducks from the old city government and county government still operating, and yet this new government, but at a certain point, there had been 20 new politicians created. There must have been some.
There were some shenanigans.
Yeah.
There were some special, I can't remember the details, but there were some special pay raises that were passed for city employees. There were certain perks that were provided to city and county employees by the old guard, and it raised the cost of the new government, actually, which didn't make the newcomers happy, but it happened.
You mentioned Tanzler was the last mayor of the old city and the first mayor of the new city government. And there's one or two others, but there were a lot of people who were brand new to politics on that first city council. That may have been a good thing.
I think, and that first city council has been called the best city council in Jacksonville history. I don't know whether that's true or not, but it sounds good. And there were some very qualified people, both white and black, serving. People like Mary Singleton and Sally Mathis had been on the council, as had Jake Godbold from the previous May elections. The newcomers, like Sulzbacher and falling short on other names, Carlucci, learned quickly and were committed to professional, nonpartisan government. And it broke down over time. By the end of Tanzler's second term, when he went to run for governor, there was a lot of sniping at him from city council.
And for what reason, I'm not sure, it did become increasingly partisan.
Yes.
Parties began to play an important role in city government.
Well, there's a couple things happened. Of course, you probably remember the oil embargo, which took away revenues from JEA and the city and so forth, and some of the good ideas that Hester and Tanzler and others had developed could not be implemented. And the oil embargo led to a national recession, which cut back on federal funding coming in. So the budgets were tighter than normal, which would provoke squabbles over how that money is going to be spent. I remember a term that Jake Godbold used when he was running for mayor, that there were no construction derricks downtown. Hadn't been any in a few years. And he said that was a sign that the city was slipping back into its old ways. And he was fairly partisan. Partisan not so much in a Democrat-Republican sense, but partisan in a political sense of wanting to gain advantage for his own particular interests. And that may or may not be good or bad, depending on what your interests are.
Well, in the course of researching for your books and so forth, do you have some favorite anecdotes about consolidation and the people involved in it?
Oh, that's a tough one. I think one of the better times, one of the better stories, was when Ed Austin got elected mayor in 1991, and he was from the old guard that supported consolidation from the very beginning, and he wanted to bring back the spirit of the original consolidation. It had ebbed during the Godbold Missouri administration, not because of them, but because of a variety of factors, including the economy. We sometimes forget how important the national economy is to how well the local economy does, and the recent Great Recession is an indication of that. But Austin came into office and only wanted to serve the one term, but he brought back Lex Hester to be his chief administrative officer. He started the insight process, which brought residents from all over Duval County, the Beechers, the black community, the Mandarin, West Side, to sit down together for a year and set priorities for the city, which hadn't been done in 25 years. And that helped set into process the downtown construction of the Dimes Union Performing Arts Center, the Gator Bowl Complex, and so forth. So I think that was a major turning point. And of course, the Jaguars came in at the same time. And Austin always said that the Jaguars, the fact that we had consolidated government was significant in influencing the Jaguars to come to Jacksonville. And I think that is something to consolidation can hang its hat on, as long as they're winning.